You know the setups where like the person's really, it's like a little kid versus a man, but the way the house is set up,
Yeah.
it's a visual trick. You better remember this from Gen Psych,
Yeah.
Aaron. And it's the little girl looks the same height as the man based on how.
Hey y'all, my name's Aaron Ballesteros, and this is Psych Ready. I'm Psych Ready. I hope you are, and we're gonna get Dr. Jillian Pierucci Psych Ready. You are what type of psychologist?
Developmental
psychologist.
Mhm.
I know everybody thinks when you say psychologist, you think, oh, the clinical type. Let's
Yeah.
sit down and talk about your problems. But there are many different types of psychologists, and a developmental psychologist is another type. And your research interests are child development, whether it be typical, atypical, autism, early intervention, symbolic play, parent scaffolding, executive function, school readiness. That's
All of the above.
All
Yeah,
of the above.
all of the above. Where
That's-
should I start? Any of them?
Well, autism.
Yeah.
You said that you really like to focus in on autism. And I wanted to ask you, what brought you into the study of autism?
So when I was in grad school, I worked got accepted into a program that was just developmental psychology, period. And I first started doing research with children with typical development. And so I'd go into preschools, those kinds of settings. And then I became aware that we actually had an autism clinic on campus. And so that was my plug. I got connected with, ironically enough, a clinical psychologist, as you said. That's what everyone thinks, right? I got connected with a clinical psychologist there. And thereafter, I just started working with her, and that grew my interest because it was an autism-focused clinic. They saw clients from, as early as 18 months with concern, even though typically they're not diagnosed that early, but parents come in with concern. So we saw kiddos as early as 18 months and then well into adulthood, because autism is a lifetime neuroatypical disorder. So, yeah. So that was really my first introduction. And then even hop back a little bit, I did early intervention work in college. And some of the kiddos that I did home-based therapy with, their first signs were language delay, which were later diagnosed with autism. But those are pretty much my first two introductions that I just hopped into it. Yeah.
And I know with the American Psychiatric Association, there's always the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. They're always making new ones. Right now we're on DSM-5. It's been moved to autism spectrum disorder.
Right.
How do you feel about that? I know that there are people that didn't like it, that it's now all a spectrum, and
Yeah.
it was moved from Asperger's and...
So originally, Asperger's, autism spectrum disorder has existed, but if you think of it as an umbrella, there were various terms within it. So the overall term was autism spectrum disorder, but within that we had like pervasive developmental disorders, or we had Asperger's, take for example. And so the practical sense of doing away with the term of Asperger's, there are individuals that already identify with that label, you know? So the way I sort of present to students sometimes, most of us can resonate with either being male or female, right? And that's what we know ourselves to be. However, imagine if someone all of a sudden came to you, Aaron, as a male, and said it's no longer a male, we're gonna name it Shimina. And you're like, what, right? So some individuals have just identified with, like, I have Asperger's, that's my label. And even in the diagnostic world, some parents were more comfortable with hearing like, oh, it's just Asperger's, it's not autism.
Right.
But what Asperger's has always been is a high-functioning version of autism. And so, in other words, you see less restrictions or less severe presentation and inhibiting factors that you'd expect to see in autism. So my view is I empathize for those that have always thought it to be their label, you know. Do I think that we'll keep moving away from the term and then there'll be something new again? That's likely to happen. But that's currently where we are, is in progress to just label it as a spectrum disorder. disorder, taking away individual terms within and thinking more of it as more severe to least severe, or better put, high functioning to low functioning.
Okay. And I know you've been working a long time with people with autism and Asperger's and whatnot. Have you ever encountered any harsh stereotypes that keep on coming up that you would like to debunk? And
Yeah, well, even just information. Probably less of stereotype. Oh, this could be stereotypical information. So take, for example, there was a thought years ago, but still recently enough, that vaccines cause autism.
right.
But we know from research vaccines have not yet shown to cause autism. And so that came out of a lab where the individual who originally said that was the case came out and spoke out and said that those data were made up. That wasn't the case. But nonetheless, that has evoked many individuals to all of a sudden, oh, do I want to get my child vaccinated? Do I not? So I think being clear about facts, right? What we know so far is that vaccines do not cause autism. So that's a prominent one. Gosh, that's a good one, Aaron. You're making me think. I'll come back to it. Give me something else.
Have you ever run into any difficulties doing research with autistic children?
Yeah. So one of the difficulties that we have researched, I have personally, and then it's a wide research topic, are repetitive behaviors. And so oftentimes individuals with autism can get fixed into something and it can become repetitive. And so take, for example, part of my research is I look at mother-child interaction, right? But what if the child gets really focused on their play object, that they're not being mindful of the mother, right? So for me, that's something that we have to figure out how to navigate in an intervention setting. How can we get the child to interact with their mother so we can investigate that and not just have the child doing repetitive behaviors like spinning the wheel on the car that's in front of them or something, instead rolling the car along with mother, you know. So it's probably a challenging thing. Or even just a common thing is behavioral issues, and that's not limited to autism. So doing research with young children in general, reining in behavioral pieces that are in your control so you can do research. But it's not impossible. You can do it. We do it.
Well, and I always hear people when regardless if it's you or if it's other people that do research when it comes to autism, they're always saying autistic children or children with autism, and it's always children. Is there a research when it comes to adults or adolescents?
For sure. So the early movement has been early. And so that was it. Oh, we're starting to see autism. It's more prevalent. Why is this the case? Are we better at diagnosing it? Or is it really that there's more occurrences and incidences of it? And so in the time, the cohorts, or across time, the cohorts that were once early and young, they're now older and they're in adulthood. And so interestingly enough that you say this, one of the recent themes of this international meeting for autism research, it's called IMFAR, their society just did a conference focused on later adulthood with autism. So do I believe that for time we focus in on the early part or even adolescence? Sure. But do I also believe that they're getting better at researching later life? Definitely. Especially some cognitive aspects and social aspects. So there's work in the pipeline for it. I think we're seeing more of it now, fortunately. But you're right that we heard about it early on initially. Yeah, does that help?
Yes,
Cool.
greatly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Awesome.
And now you're psych ready.
Yeah, there you go. Psych ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and hope you guys learned a lot from a developmental psychologist.
Bye.